Farmers are the lifeblood of America. Without farmers, we would not have as easy access to food as we do now. Some might also take farmers for granted. But during the decade before the Great Depression, farmers were already feeling the pressures of falling crop prices, followed by the Dust Bowl, and then soon the rest of the country would follow suit. Due to the events of World War I, farmers had a lot of debt and had surplus, which drove the prices of their crops down. Who helped keep the lights on for those who put the food at our tables? How did the farmers make it in America during one of the worst economic periods in U.S. history? This is the story of how some did and some did not. One of the biggest challenges a farmer must face is the economic principle of supply and demand. Just growing crops is not enough. Simply put, when the supply is high and the demand is low, prices are not good. But the opposite is true. If there is high demand but low supply, the prices will rise to meet that demand. Farmers have to balance growing enough to make a profit, but also not growing too much so the price doesn't fall lower than the margins they work in. This was one of the biggest reasons farmers got hit so hard. The balance between the supply and the demand was off. There were too many crops that flooded the market and not enough buyers to handle the supply. One of the other major forces, this time being natural, is also one of key importance to farmers: when it does not rain. A period of time where it does not rain for a period longer than average is called a drought. One of the biggest series of droughts would be known as the Dust Bowl. According to the National Drought Mitigation Center, the term Dust Bowl was coined in 1935 when an A&P reporter, Robert Geiger, used it to describe the drought-affected south-central United States in the aftermath of a horrific dust storm. The Dust Bowl was created through weather and human-made conditions that lasted nearly a decade. It can be considered 4 events that happened so fast that there was not enough time for the regions to recover. According to the National Drought Mitigation Center, those events happened in 1931 and 1930, 1934, 1936, and 1939 to 1940. Millions of people would have to migrate from these areas, and some estimates say the Dust Bowl cost $1 million in aid. Most farmers in that time also faced extreme hardship, and many joined those who moved in that period. 1 out of 10 farms changed possession, and half of those were involuntarily, and 21% of all rural families within the Great Plains were using federal emergency aid. The Dust Bowl is the product of a series of drought, overexpansion, soil erosion, and nutrition lesion. The earth needs time to heal after a season of harvest, and farmers now know that you cannot overfarm, and that leads to not having enough land to rotate around. The Dust Bowl was finally in the spring of 1938, and 1941, rain would be back to normal. The farmers who made it out of the Dust Bowl did it through sheer will and optimism, and the U.S. and the legacy afterward would do the work to make sure something like that would not happen again. The Great Depression has been used to compare most major global depressions ever since, 2008 and COVID in recent years being two compared. The greatest enemy, like the weather, is the market, and how unstable both can be. In the 1930s, farmers were a large portion of the population. 1 out of 4 Americans were farmers. So, imagine 100 people in a room. 40 of those people would be farmers. Sell that up and the numbers and cost devastation go through the roof. According to the Center for Economic Policy Research, the seasonally adjusted price of cotton, for instance, fell 39% between the fourth quarter of 1929 and the third quarter of 1930. To put that in context, say a single crop of cotton was $1 single. That same cotton crop in 1930 was now only worth 61 cents. That is a terrifying drop-off in value, and it sells across the nation and over many different types of crops. Lower prices are good for businesses, but not the farmer. In the same report, they state the following. For example, the producer price of tobacco fell 23% from 1929 to 1930, but the price of a pack of cigarettes rose 2%. The Great Depression showcases how, no matter what, corporations will always try to push down their bottom line. The producers, if prices are lower, have to eat the cost, while customers have to pay more. The floor and the ceiling get closer together and only big companies win, while everyone else loses. This applied to many of the crops at the time, across the board. The cotton of your shirt can be lower, but you could probably guess they still rate the price of your shirt. It's an interesting economic trend. The big companies, most of the time, are making major profits while everyone else is going down. But how did the government step in to try to help? Nearing the end of the Dust Bowl, one of the most influential presidents of all time, FDR or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, would be in office. FDR would become the 32nd president and the only one to serve more than 2 terms. He served 4. And he was related to Teddy Roosevelt by being his cousin. FDR had a plan to help the farmers. The AAA Act, otherwise known as the Agricultural Adjustment Act. FDR had to work fast to pull the U.S. from the economic fallout since he would take office during the 4th year of the Great Depression. His plan was the New Deal. The AAA Act was, in the simplest term, a bribe to drain the surplus crops out of the market. If the supply is high and demand is low, that means prices aren't good. The government would give payouts or subsidies to the farmers. The hope was that by promoting fewer crops, it would stabilize market values. According to the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, the year before the act was passed, cotton was at its lowest price of only 5.1 cents per pound. But the sale alone that they would have to cut back on was mind-boggling. Another stat from the EOA was this. Although 7 basic crops were controlled by the legislation, cotton was the dominant concern of Arkansas farmers. Arkansas cotton crop of 2.7 million acres was already planted by the time the act passed. The Agricultural Adjustment Act had to persuade Arkansas farmers to destroy a portion of the crop. Secretary Wallace announced a plow-up operation. The agency allocated Arkansas cotton farmers a crop reduction of 30% based on the 1931 cotton production, when Arkansas farmers planted 3,341,000 crops. Farmers needed to reduce 1 million acres. 1 million crops to most people is an unfathomable amount, and the farmers were told that if they were to remain economically viable, they were told to get rid of it. When farmers in Arkansas decided to do it, they destroyed 25% of the total acres of cotton. But the farmers were not holding an empty bag. For all those losses in crop, they got a $10.8 million in cash subsidies. This same story would play out in other states, such as Iowa. The AAA Act would work for some, but will be late for others, shown in this video clip.
Decade-old farm problems. Roosevelt's answer, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, guaranteed farmers a better price for their farm products if they would agree not to grow crops on part of their land. After long debate in Congress, the AAA finally passed. But for Mary Morton's family, it came too late. They had already lost their farm by the time the AAA loans were made available.
At the time they lost their farm, they had between 8,000 and 10,000 bushel of corn on the farm, and they sold it for about 9 cents a bushel. 1 year later, the government came out with this 45-cent loan, and if they could have had that year, it would have saved the farm. Many farms were saved because the government came out with a 45-cent a bushel loan.
The AAA Act would prove to help most farmers, but what would come next is World War II, which raised the demand for agricultural goods. But most farmers already had to either give up their land or move to the city, so those who remained were only able to do it through sheer will. And even so, the AA Act was not equal. The bigger your farm, the easier it was for you to reap the benefits of the Act. Farmers who weathered the storm would enter another era of war. The end of the Great Depression of farmers was marked in 1933. The legacy that farmers of that era is one of survival, adaptation, gains, and losses. With rising prices of food and the war effort, farmers cemented their legacy as America's lifeblood.